sound like a real sexy job, but the Army can't fight without it. They can't fight without the clerks and the cooks and the mechanics and that huge support apparatus. And that's almost all on the reserve. And the reason it's designed that way is you can't send the Army to fight anywhere for very long without calling up the National Guard to support it. And by calling up the National Guard to support it, if you think of the first Gulf War, it was kind of, it's kind of they're sending troops over there or something. But then all of a sudden, they called up like 500,000 guys out of civilian life and sent them to the desert in Arabia. And people said, oh, wait a minute, what's going on? And the whole point there is that by causing this dislocation of pulling all these reservists out, the Army felt like this is going to force the country to have a conversation about, is this something we really want to do or not? And you can see this again on the War on Terror, and these battles in Iraq and Afghanistan and all over the globe. I think we've all become used to the idea that there's a lot of call-ups. And the Army did that very intentionally because they want that dislocation to affect the average person so that there is some sort of political commitment to the mission they're being sent on. Rediscovery of military classics. I'll be real quick on this. They went back to the basics. What made the great generals win? And that's where they came to the conclusion that, we're obsessed with firepower and not maneuver. You look at the great battles of history, they're rarely slogging matches. You think of maybe Verdun, where the French and Germans bled each other to death with artillery, for yards of ground. The British at the Battle of the Somme, 50,000 casualties in one day to take 200 yards of barbed wire. This is an emphasis on firepower. They looked at Napoleon and Caesar and these timeless military classics. They read Clausewitz and they said, there's another way. There's a way to maneuver and destroy people rather than just bludgeon them to death. And then again, the officers, one I didn't mention is a guy named William Depew. He was the commander of TRADIC. TRADIC is the Army Training Doctrine. And he was really the grandfather, the guy who got all these officers together and said, let's come up with a new way to fight. Oh, back one. We skipped one. Airland 2000. Let's talk about what this strategy is and why it's different. First, it's no longer what they call active defense. If you were an Army infantryman in the 70s, in the 60s or 70s, and maybe the very early 80s, you sat in Europe, and the idea was there was a Soviet horde on the other side of the Iron Curtain, and it would attack you, and we would fight kind of the way we fought in the Battle of the Bulge. We would try to attrit them and trade space for time. We'd fall back and try to bleed them to death. The problem with that was twofold. One is the Soviets had so much mass, so many men, that we might not have been able to destroy enough on this way back. The second was Germany itself, West Germany at the time, didn't have that much space to trade. So this idea of active defense was kind of static. And what the Army said is, one thing we know is if you're defending, you're not going to win. The only way a decisive result is achieved is to take the offensive, impose your will on the enemy, and beat him actively. And this was a big mindset change because the Army had not trained to fight like this in a long time. What they wanted to do was basically create a blitzkrieg. And if you think of the Army, not the Army in World War II that landed in Normandy, it blasted its way into Normandy. But how did it chase the Germans out of France and into Germany? That was an American blitzkrieg. It was tanks, infantry, and air power moving in synchronicity and just jumping on the Germans, never giving them a chance, and rushing them back into Germany. So the idea was that we want to fight this mobile battle of not just taking this big mass head on, but fighting it using all the elements, armor, artillery, and infantry, and tightly integrated with air power. Extended battlefield. This is really important. One thing that's really changed if you're a World War II veteran or a Korea veteran is air power. The Army has helicopters and aircraft that have a destructive capability which is vastly greater than what you may have been exposed to in the past. What the extended battlefield means is when a Soviet army, which is consists of many, many divisions, the Soviets look at those divisions as bullets in a gun. They burn them out. They're going to attack, wreck one, another one's going to move up and take its place. It's like a big conveyor belt. And in that active defense, you're at the front of the conveyor belt trying to stop each division as it hits you. And the Army said, that's stupid. Let's do this. Let's pin this first division. Let's fight an extended battlefield, and let's loop around. Let's use our mobility to loop around and attack deeper into the enemy territory. And this was a mindset, and I might point out, if you read Soviet writings, they really didn't like that we decided to do this. We said, we're not going to fight in Germany. We might fight in Poland. We might fight in East Germany. We're going to attack you so that you can't get this big mass rolling. And again, it seems very simple, but this was a big mindset. Now, having said that we're going to do this battle of speed and movement and maneuver, right? Offensive speed, we're going to have mobility. Another thing that's going to change is we're going to fight at night. And the U.S. Army today, the U.S. military rules the night. They have very good night vision gear, very good practice and training in fighting at night. We want to fight at night because almost everybody else doesn't want to. And again, that's quite a change from 20 or 30 years ago. So how are we gonna do this? Okay, 5 more minutes. We're gonna have a tight integration with the Air Force. We're gonna have these teams called FIST teams. We're gonna get a very unhappy Air Force pilot to go along with the infantry and actually control the air power at a very fine level to support the infantry troops. And then, of course, our goal is to destroy a Soviet invasion in Europe. Just some important personalities. Who are the people that put this into effect? President Reagan, he was elected to rebuild the military. This was a pet project for him. He supported it politically and helped get the money. Secretary Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense. He also supported this plan and lobbied Congress for the money. And there you see Generals Depew, Powell, and Schwarzkopf, and they're guys who were very big on this change. So we needed some new equipment. This is the part you might find kind of interesting. If we're going to fight fast, we have to have new equipment because the equipment we have was built for this type of conflict. So we had the M14 carbine. We're going to replace it with the M16. You probably heard a lot of bad things about the M16. I can only speak from my own experience. The first time I shot it in Grenada, I blew a clod of dirt out of the flash suppressor. It was a fine weapon. By the time the 80s rolled around, whatever problems with it had been worked out. It's a very fine weapon. To put some perspective on it for you, if you do the calculations, an 8-man infantry squad in 1983 has 6 times the firepower of a World War II infantry squad with 12 men. So you're putting a lot of ordnance downrange very quickly. You might recognize the gentleman on the left. That doesn't look much different, from about World War I to Vietnam. That's the gear they used. Here's the modern army on the right. You can see the brackets on their helmets. That's for their night vision gear because we're going to fight at night now. Biggest change, for 500 years the gun ruled the battlefield. In the 80s we invented something called Kevlar. Kevlar stops bullets. I have a great story about that. I don't have a whole lot of time for, but in Grenada, the 82nd was the first unit to use Kevlar helmets, and a guy got shot in the head with an AK-47 at 50 meters. Now with an old steel pot, you probably realize that'd blow your head off. It's stuck in the side of the bullet. So all the old timers who said, I don't like these new Kevlar, you can't cook in them, you can't wash in them, you can't dig in them, they stop bullets, give me one, okay? And what's different to today is now we have full body Kevlar. So our troops wear body armor that can stop military rounds to their head and torso. I can't emphasize the change on this. This is the first time armor's caught up with guns in 500 years. It's hard to kill a soldier now. So you can see the change in their weapons there. The M79 grenade launcher, if you're a Vietnam era veteran, you might recognize that. That was made the M203. It was an attachment to the M16, so you could fire grenades. So this is, again, new equipment. The M113 armored personnel carrier. It worked. It'd make about 20 miles an hour downhill in a hurricane. If you're going to fight a massive, high-speed war of maneuver, it's too slow. You can almost run as fast as that vehicle. So what do we replace it with? The Bradley. The Bradley can go 50 miles an hour over broken ground. Why do we need the Bradley? Well, first it's got a gun on it to support the troops, which is important when we have 8 guys now instead of 12. Secondly, it's fast. It's fast to maneuver these troops to fight this in this extended battlefield. It's also important because you might recognize the M60 tank here, which is a descendant of the M48 Patton. It was replaced by the M1 Abrams. Again, the M60, it's about a 30-mile-an-hour tank, diesel engine. The M1, jet turbine engine, sounds like a helicopter. 60 miles an hour. The old armored personnel carriers couldn't keep up with the tanks. So what we have done is we've built equipment to implement our strategy. We have fast vehicles, fast tanks that allow us to move quickly to fight in this extended battlefield. The old Huey helicopters, that's a civilian helicopter painted green. It was replaced by the Black Hawk. The Black Hawk is an armored flying bus. Just to give you an example, the floor will collapse in a crash on a Black Hawk, on a Huey, with about 2 or 3 Gs. I think it's 5 or 6. A Black Hawk's floorboard won't collapse in a 200 G crash. Okay? So even if you get shot down on that, you're probably going to live. Some more new equipment. We're going to work with the Air Force, which if you're an Army and Air Force guy like my dad and I, this is unprecedented. The Air Force actually built a plane to help us, the A-10 Warthog. This plane is a close support plane. It's almost impervious to gunfire. It's got a 30-millimeter cannon and can destroy tanks. This was a plane that was built, again, specifically to implement this new strategy. We have new artillery. We have something called the MRLS. It's a multi-rocket launching system that kind of supplants artillery. We built Apache gunships, which are, again, a flying tank, basically. And then knowledge for battle. The Army has something called C3I, Command, Control, and Intelligence. In order to manage this big, deep, extended battle, you need very good communications and intelligence. And they spent a lot of money upgrading and creating new units and new battalions and new techniques to control this Army. The last thing, of course, we even improved the food. You might recognize the old C-Rat over here, which was the successor to the K-Rat. I got to eat some of those that were packaged in the year of my birth. They were less than delicious. They were replaced on the right with the MRE, the meal ready to eat, which they complain about today, but I'll tell you it was a vast improvement. It was basically freeze-dried. It was a lot lighter. It didn't clank. You didn't have to bury cans, any of those things. So we've got this new Army. We've got this new doctrine. We've got this new equipment. So let's try it out. First step, we're going to go to Grenada in 1983. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but the important lesson of Grenada was twofold. It worked, but it was a fiasco. It was a fiasco because the services couldn't communicate with each other. So a very important step came out of Grenada, and that step was the Goldwater-Nichols Reformation Act. Y'all remember old Barry Goldwater? He was the driving force behind this. What that did is it reorganized the Pentagon, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when they used to make war plans, the way this used to work is they had to be unanimous. They were like the Politburo. So a military plan had to have something for everybody, which meant that whether we needed it or not, each service chief had to be placated to sign off on the plan. Goldwater-Nichols said, we're not going to do that anymore. The chairman of the Joint Chief is the military advisor to the president, and the other guys advise him, and that's that. So that was an important change, a very important change. It also created unified commands. Now a colonel or a captain can't become a field level officer unless he's held what they call joint commands, where he's worked in Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps joint units, so they have this interoperability. I'm going to wrap it up. Improvement, just cause in Panama. We invade Panama in 1989. This is important because nothing went wrong. Everything worked. And of course, we were successful there. So what's the end result of this? The vindication of the way we fight is Desert Storm, right? This is the army that was pulled out of Europe to go destroy the 5th largest army in the world. How effective is this new equipment and this new strategy and these newly trained troops? I'm going to tell you, this is a biblical victory. The 5th largest army in the world is utterly destroyed. The leading cause of death for U.S. troops in the Gulf War was truck accident. Okay? They literally wiped it off the face of the earth using speed, mass, and maneuver, fighting deep and not hitting them head on. I'll summarize real quick. I say this is a busy piece. You think of the end of the Vietnam War, it's peaceful. It has not been peaceful if you're a member of the U.S. Army. You've been pretty busy. We fought in Grenada in 1983, Panama in 1989, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait in the 90s, Somalia in 1993, and Kosovo in 1999. Then we had a peace dividend and had the war on terror. So it has been a busy time. I know this has gone a little long, but it was a lot to cover. I'd be glad to discuss any questions you might have afterwards. If you want to know more about Grenada or anything I've commented about, I know I've hit you with a lot of information, but the key thing is that this revolution in strategy, hardware, and training that happened in the 80s is what has given you the Army that's been, I would say, pretty successful today. And thank you a lot for your time.